Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another edition of the Refs Roundtable here on Wrestling with the Future. This week, we're talking about social media and wrestling, and we have a first for the show. I'm joined by two first-time guests, special friends of mine, new friends to the program. Joining me today are Jason Tuttle. Jason, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And Mike Keski. Mike, thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Glad to be on the show.
Well, I appreciate it. You guys I know have been wrestling fans for a long time, so hopefully we got a lot to say. Like I said, we're looking at social media and wrestling. I've always said on the program, and I've been saying it for years, that wrestling fans are simultaneously the best and worst human beings in the planet. And
accurate.
if there's anything I can think of that fits that description as well as simultaneously the greatest and worst thing ever, it's social media. And I think that's in recent days we've kind of looked into that. So we want to look at wrestling here in social media, and I asked you guys, Jason, you've actually an idea you had a while back, so kind of why we started the ball rolling here. So we're going to focus on three topics today. We're going to look at recent interactions. Wrestling has been in social media a lot, especially in the last 48 hours. That we're recording now, it's June 3rd. So the last couple days, wrestling has made several social media headlines. Excuse me. We're going to look at the good behind social media, its impact, and the bad. So let's start with wrestling in the headlines. I think the biggest story that's coming out, because it's gotten the most press, is WWE superstar Jackson Ryker. I don't know if you guys have followed this at all.
Yeah.
He's a member of the stable, the Forgotten Sons. He tweeted out a pro-Trump comment and drew the ire of several of his peers, including his teammates, even so far as Dave Bautista challenging him to a fight, saying that they had enough mutual contacts he could find him if he wanted to spout that. So, Jason, you kind of pitched this. I'm going to bounce this off you. Where do you think that as a public figure, especially wrestlers, because that was kind of what was unique about Jackson Ryker's tweet, was it was in character of sorts. It was the grumpy biker, rejected biker character. He even closed the tweet out with his catchphrase. Where do you think wrestlers should draw the line between the personality and risking being heels at a time maybe when being the bad guy is not the best social image?
Well, I definitely think he or anybody should be more mindful of what is going on in society and should play accordingly. Kayfabe is practically dead these days.
Yeah.
And I miss it. I honestly miss it. I miss the old days. While some wrestlers can use it for their advantage, Mick Foley has done a lot of good on social media, but he's got attacked a couple of times. But there's a time and place, and there's certain topics or situations that you should stay away from. I don't necessarily agree with him using his character to promote a political figure, especially right now. But on the other side of the coin, that's what some of the heels used to do back in the day, just to get a rise.
Right.
And so, don't know if he was doing that to get a rise or he's actually showing his personal beliefs.
That's a fair point. I know several comments that I can think of off the top of my head actually called him out on that, saying like, I hope this is a gimmick and not actually you, because apparently his not to avoid the political spectrum, his support of Trump apparently caught a lot of people off guard. Although I think in the realistic spectrum, you have a disenfranchised Southern biker. That if I was to imagine his political candidate a choice, it probably wouldn't be the ones we think of. So, Mike, this next one's for you. We're going to bounce off what Jason said. Another big bit in the headlines was Tony Khan's response to Linda Hogan's comments.
I saw that.
Obviously, she straight again. I'm trying to avoid crossing over. The last show we did was on politics and religion and how they shouldn't mesh. But she made some very I'm not going to give her any airtime, but she made some very racially insensitive comments. And Tony Khan straight up told her she's joined her husband as being banned from AEW. So I want to bounce that to you, Mike. How do you think in this kind of world, the social media and wrestling, that the real life consequences that can come from some comments like that?
I mean, you definitely have to be mindful of the consequences of your actions, especially with the social media audience. You're typing in front of a keyboard, but that's a worldwide audience. And especially if you're already a public figure, that's even more doubly so. That's going to get out there twice as fast.
Right. That's a fair point. I think it's funny, though, that the defensive narrative was obvious. Oh, got
Your
a run in the
mascot.
background there. She loves being on the show. You know, her first appearance got better ratings than my first appearance did.
Nice.
But I think it's funny, the narrative being that, you know, he referred to her as your husband, or Hulk Hogan as your husband. It's like they've been divorced for over 10 years.
Over 10
and
years.
Right.
they haven't spoken. You got to be careful, like you said, Mike, because she damaged. I mean, obviously Hulk Hogan's done a good job in the last few decades of damaging his own reputation, but she dragged him down, and they haven't spoken in probably 10 years.
Right.
But yeah,
Well,
go ahead.
I have to say that I think AEW was using that as a gimmick.
Yeah.
They're still, I mean, they're up and coming. You know, they are trying to get their foot in the door, trying to get that notice. And so far, they've been doing pretty well. So they're doing anything they can. And I think Tony saw the opportunity. I mean,
yeah, I could see that. I think too, with because obviously Hulk Hogan being forgiven and brought back into the fold, he's got his Legends contract, and
Right.
just slapping Hulkamania on some merchandise, he's still a top seller. So I don't think he's going to shed too many tears that he's not going to get any of Tony Khan's money.
Exactly.
But transitioning from that, the next thing we want to look at, obviously, so when people think social media wrestling, Jason, you nailed it on the head that kayfabe is dead. That genie's that's out of the bottle. Be it when I was a kid and the Iron Sheik and Hacksaw Jim Duggan got arrested together, you know, versus in the early 90s when Vince McMahon straight up came out with a speech and said wrestling is scripted. Now, granted, he was trying to avoid, he didn't want to pay the taxes and fees that went with regulating a sport, so he pitched it as he wanted it to be grouped in with Broadway and musical theater and other things, performance art. So I mean, that's gone, but social media has really been that big nail in the coffin. So we're going to look at first at the bad in social media, and the first thing I want to look at is the storylines. And we're just going to touch. Obviously, this is all going to be recent because social media has only had its really hand around the throat of society for about 15 years. I remember having it was 2009, I think it was 2009, 2010, somewhere in there, where somebody had to show me how to sign up for Facebook. and it feels like Facebook's been around forever. It's been around less than 10 years, or a little more than 10 years. I mean, so these are all going to be new, recent things, but we're going to look at a couple of bits that have been where storylines. We're going to first look at storylines, angles that were completely changed or scrapped entirely because social media destroyed kayfabe. And the first one I want to focus on, we're going to mention is they were building up an angle. They had teased it for months with various clips and backstage segments. They were building a romance angle between John Cena and AJ Lee, if you guys remember that from years ago. And they dropped that entirely as if it had never happened, because right around the time that the big blow-off where he and AJ Lee kissed in the ring, somebody put on, I guess, Twitter or Instagram, whatever it was back then, pictures of John Cena and his girlfriend at her, it was a high school reunion.
Oh, wow.
So it's like, here's your main event star in a main event storyline going on social media, where he was at the time, one of the biggest social media presence, saying, just kidding, everything you're seeing is crap. She's not my girlfriend. And it's funny because I want to look at the flip side of that is a split angle. If you remember the first time they did a booking angle where they broke up Rusev and Lana, where she went with Dolph Ziggler and he brought in,
I remember that.
Summer Rae as like the Lana knockoff, and they had to drop that angle because Lana went on Instagram and revealed that her and Rusev had gotten engaged in the middle of a heated rivalry where they hated each other.
Right.
So, Jason, I'll go to you. I got a couple others we'll touch on, but You mentioned in your first thought about people, you have to be careful and be aware. How do you, as a performer, putting yourself in the shoes of a performer, how do you look at a wrestler who has to keep what little of kayfabe is left while still having a life in the public eye? Well,
these days it is very hard. It's no different than Hollywood stars. One that just recently just surprises me is Taker. He's doing the documentaries and he's going on all these shows. And I mean, I feel like my childhood is ending. I'm sitting there listening.
He's officially become Mark Calloway, and he's
exactly.
The Undertaker's. Yeah.
He's got this Texas accent. It's like, man, where's the dead man voice?
Right.
I'm crying here.
Yeah.
You and I, our Star Wars lifetime, how big I was into my character. I actually modeled, the way I did that stuff after Ultimate Warrior. Okay. He was so into his character, he lived it, and I tried to live it through mine. I think if the core audience is still young people, I think you have to have some of that escapism. Talking about political stuff or heated topics. If you're trying to get over a character that does something, you have to make sure that what you're talking in your personal life doesn't go against that. I mean, at the end of the day, that's how you're earning your living. If you screw it up too much, then you're going to be out of a living.
Now that's a good point, Michael. You had to say something.
I mean, it'd be like seeing Daniel Bryan eat a cheeseburger.
Yes.
That's funny. It's funny. We're gonna actually get to the Undertaker here in a little bit, but it's funny you mentioned that because that's been a big thing with the docuseries and the behind the scenes stuff. But it's funny. It's funny to see the difference because Michelle McCool actually got some legit heat from the company a couple years ago because she posted some pictures of them on vacation. And it was like, oh, no, you can't destroy the mind. I mean, there's the because he had some kind of brace on at the time because he had just had surgery and he was this gray hair, crippled looking old man sitting on the beach with his pina colada. And it's like, oh, well, there goes the Undertaker's character.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, though, truth be told, as big a fan as I was as a kid, you mentioned the Ultimate Warrior. It's a good thing Twitter wasn't around during his heyday.
Yeah.
I don't think that would have worked well with his character. But Mike, this next one I'm going to look at you is direct you. The other side is social media creates a unique experience in that the internet never forgets. Mm-hmm. Anything that has ever been put on the internet is always out there, and one thing especially wrestling fans, but fans have always been good at is finding things. And in recent memory, several high-profile careers have been derailed, in some cases completely destroyed, because of past social media activity prior to their arrival. The two that I want to touch on is Lars Sullivan. If you remember, he was in the middle of a giant push. They were actually, the original plan was to have him squash John Cena. I believe it was at one of the Rumbles or the Survivor Series to kind of build him up. And his push got derailed when
I'm tired. I haven't seen him on TV. And
where is he now? He's gone.
They played off that he was hurt. I noticed he wasn't on the list of recent releases, which surprised me. But they completely removed him from the air when he of all interesting combinations, it became previous homophobic comments that he had made had come to light. And it also was revealed that he had some involvement in pornography. So those two kind of destroyed his push. I mean, here he was a guy that was ready to be groomed for the main event. And on the other side, on NXT, I think I'm pronouncing her name right. Was it Zara Schreiber? She was fired completely, fired out of the gate when old social media posts of hers with swastikas and white power symbols. Turns out she was a white supremacist, or at least thought it was fun to associate with that type of people. So here's two people being groomed for big pushes gone because of social media. So and then even now, like we mentioned earlier with the comments Linda Hogan made, she's since deleted that tweet, but that'll be with her for the rest of her life.
Yeah.
So Mike, put yourself in their shoes. How do you approach the rise in fame and exposure that comes with that, knowing that, I mean, obviously you know who you were, knowing that you have that background or that past?
I mean, that like is like pretty much like you have to be mindful not only of your present day, but you have to be mindful of what things you used to do, things you had said before in the past. Like I know you can't remove it entirely, but you can at the very least go back and curate your social media. You can delete old posts, but if you know you're gonna be pushed at some point, I would get somebody. If not you yourself, if you're busy, hire somebody.
Yeah,
get somebody to go through your posts.
That's
clean
true.
That stuff up.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Jason. There's entire firms and companies that exist just to purge social, like for job interviews and stuff like that.
Yep.
It's actually funny you mentioned social media because it wasn't like his social media profile. The comments Lars Sullivan made was on a message board on a bodybuilding website.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So I mean, that was who would have thought? I mean, I remember years ago for a college project having to basically do a deep dive of yourself on the internet, and I found two profiles from old websites. One was LiveJournal, and I'm trying to remember what the other one was, that I had long since forgotten even existed. And it wasn't anything offensive. Obviously, you guys know me, but it was like, man, years from now, somebody could have looked at and, oh, you wrote this, whatever, post. I know that the one that I thought was funny at the time had to do with the a high profile murder case. And here it was years later, I'd written something like, man, one of these days they're going to find out the husband did it. And turns out he did. So.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, it's no different than paparazzi. I mean, it has gotten to a point where people kind of go out and look for stuff. They know that these stories are out or could become big stories. So, the person that found the Lars stuff, he walked on a pile of gold.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and it's not like his profile name was Lars Sullivan. He had to have traced a profile name to Lars's real name. I mean, that was somebody who you didn't just accidentally stumble upon that. You were out there looking for dirt.
Exactly.
But I mean, it's crazy. But the other thing, keeping with this, is you talk about, Jason, you mentioned it, is kayfabe being completely dead. Social media has been the nail in that coffin 10 times over. And there's been a couple of high-profile instances, kayfabe being dead. One of the ones that actually drew some mainstream attention a couple years ago was Braun Strowman and Roman Reigns were in the midst of a very heated rivalry, trying to kill each other. They had an ambulance match. They had some crazy other big fights. And then I can't remember which one it was. I tried to find a picture, and all I found was references to it. But they were on vacation together, and one of the two of them posted a picture of the two of them at like a tiki bar, having a good old time. And it's like, wait a minute, you guys, that was Iron Sheik, Hacksaw Jim Duggan level. You guys hate each other. And again, like we mentioned earlier with Michelle McCool breaking kayfabe by posting pictures of the Undertaker, they've touched on the Bo Dallas and Bray Wyatt posting pictures at family functions together, even though the company's not allowed to acknowledge that they're related. The Winton family is very close. So I think it's funny because you got to walk the fine line. The wrestlers, they have to kind of walk that fine line. So what do you guys think in your experience? Can you guys have any, Jason, I'll start with you, and then Mike, do you guys think of anything, social media examples you've come across where you're like, well, there goes that narrative, like shot to hell?
I can tell you one that I really wasn't sure if it was real or not was Ronda Rousey and Becky Lynch. That got really intense.
You're talking about the heated Twitter exchanges they were having.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And that really, I was actually following that. I was like, whoa,
Yeah.
And I think I did see a behind the scenes picture, behind the curtain of them all kind of, carrying on. But yeah, it could be used in a good way to push storylines. Like that really drew me. But then it can go a little too far.
Yeah, I will say on your example though, I followed it too. I give Becky Lynch credit. If it was, it certainly didn't seem word for word scripted. I'm sure her and Rhonda got a little bit of leeway.
Right.
What about you, Mike? Anything jumps to mind for you for social media smashing kayfabe?
Nothing that I can really think of off the top of my head that I've seen. I've seen, social media smash kayfabe in a good way, like in the case of Zack Ryder. His whole second half of his career wouldn't have happened without social media.
That's true. We're actually going to touch on Zack Ryder later. That's under the positives of wrestlers being able to get themselves over. That's going to be a topic we're going to get to here.
Awesome.
I think it's funny. You look at social media, because what we talked about earlier with the Jackson Riker comments is several high-profile wrestlers, MJF, Baron Corbin, Dolph Ziggler, are famous for maintaining character on social media, which leads to negative publicity for the company, because Baron Corbin has said, basically told people to fuck off and these horrible things, and it's like, well, yeah, he's an evil heel jerk. He's going to say that, I mean, one of the people I follow on Twitter is the Iron Sheik. I think his social media is hilarious. If he had had Twitter 30 years ago, I think I can only imagine some of the things he would have said, especially when you think about the stories with fans. I love telling the bits. When I was a kid, I used to get all the old tapes, the territory days, like Memphis and Mid-South and all that. And you'd watch these shows, and Jay, you guys are both a little older than I am, I believe. That you watch these shows back in the early mid 80s, 10,000 people on a Tuesday, and every show 2-3 people were getting arrested because they were jumping the crowd, jumping the barriers, and the police, your Jim Cornettes and your Iron Sheik, these guys had to be walked to the ring with police escorts because fans would try and throw stuff at them and spit on them, and you heard stories. One of the big ones was down in Texas, and then in the Mid-South territory, the Freebirds had to start getting police escorts because the fans would follow them from the airport and slash the tires on their rental car. And the first, Michael Hayes tells the story, the first time they had a police escort, when they went outside, the police car had its tires slashed because that was the Freebirds' ride home. So, fans don't get to that level, but they can really push it, and I think that interaction is interesting. I want to go there where the wrestlers kind of have to walk a fine line. I touched on Baron Corbin and Dolph Ziggler drawing real heat. You can also see it the other way, where face wrestlers or people, babyface characters, can get turned on in real life. I think the two examples that really jump to mind for me are Seth Rollins and Alberto Del Rio, who were both playing face runs at the time. And Seth Rollins got into a Twitter spat where he was very negative towards indie wrestlers and indie fans. And Alberto Del Rio obviously drew the ire from some comments he made in response to Paige, who he was in a relationship with at the time, basically straight up admitting he was a coked up abuser, and that serves her right. And crowds turned on him, rightfully so. In Del Rio's case, crowds turned on them, and I think it's funny to see that even a good character. I mean, I think of your Stone Cold Steve Austins, your Hulk Hogan's, your Randy Savages, the biggest names, the most popular names. One bad tweet goes viral, and a week later, Seth Rollins getting booed out of the building as the babyface conquering champion. So, Mike, I'll bounce that to you. How do you, let's put yourself in the shoes of a booker or producer backstage, how do you guide your face wrestlers to mind their tongue? They're allowed to have their personas, because you got to walk that fine line. Someone like a Becky Lynch, who's out there talking smack to Ronda Rousey, or someone like a Stone Cold, whose entire appeal is that he is a jerk just to the right people. How do you put yourself in that shoes? How do you direct your face wrestlers to mind their business, to stay in their lane per se?
Well, I think it goes back into even how they build those characters to begin with. You have to take the best character, you have to take it on yourself and amp that up. And basically the same with social media. You have to keep that in mind, that who your character is and how they perceive you. You have to keep that in mind, that when you're a wrestling superstar and you're on social media, you're always in character, so to speak. Whenever you log on, you have to keep that level of character in the back of your mind when you're posting. That's how I would try to keep that in mind, hopefully.
That's a good point, Jason. Same question to you. Put yourself in that shoes. How do you what direction do you give the Ghost guys?
I agree with Mike. It's no different if you're in the stadium, that you're in character. It's just another extension. Mm-hmm. The one thing that it's their responsibility, but it's also responsibility of promotion too, to kind of watch it. And when Ronda and Becky were getting really heated, WWE kind of came down on them a little bit. Mm-hmm. A lot of the superstars, WWE superstars, have WWE handles on Twitter. Mm-hmm. That should be completely for their character, for their persona. If they want to have a personal account, make another one. Mm-hmm. That's where you separate the line. Like Mike said,
does his.
Yeah, like Mike said, live in the character. Like I said, good example for me is Warrior. I mean, you don't have to go that far as how Warrior went, but you're in that light, you're in that spotlight. You have fans that look up to your character, your persona. The last thing you want to do is say something or slip up, and you just wreck their dreams and their opinions of you. I mean, again, you'll lose your living.
Right, and it's come up on the program before that for the example that I was using. We talked about with we got into a conversation where I found myself defending some comments that Jim Cornette, I don't think there's very few people on social media that are better at pissing people off with tweets than he is. Yeah. But he had made some comments on his podcast that were critical of Becky Lynch, not as a person, but as a character. And the point Jim Cornette was trying to make was that when Becky Lynch comes out there and she's crying and she talks about, I've got to play the man for the last, 8 years and I've NXT and I got to fulfill my dream. She basically was admitting that everything you've seen me do, I was acting, it was crap. And Jim Cornette's point was she can never play the man again because exactly. you've just admitted that character was a character. Mm-hmm. Just like it when Stone Cold, if he were to come out and do something like that, he could never have the mantra again. I mean, even think about his heel turn. Was it help me out here, Mike? Was that WrestleMania 19? When he sided with Vince McMahon.
Yep.
Even after he went back to the rattlesnake character, the polish was gone because you'd seen him. Okay, he's one of the boys. He's a guy playing a character. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a good segue because we want to transition into the you talk about fan reactions. Fans, social media has given fans direct, and that's one of the ones that's both good and bad. And we'll touch on the direct feedback, but it gives fans a direct voice to the company that they never had before. But that's led to last-minute changes. And mm-hmm. I think in recent memory, the biggest recipient or sufferer, benefactor, or however you want to look at it, of social media fan backlash has been Roman Reigns. Definitely. And on at least 2 occasions, main event pay-per-views, including a WrestleMania, have changed from what I understand at the last second. WrestleMania, his WrestleMania when Seth Rollins cashed in, when Roman Reigns was scheduled to beat Brock Lesnar for the title, there was a story that came out there. His family, the famous Samoan dynasty, they weren't in on it. They thought they were going to watch Roman win the title, and they were ready to throw down backstage. Like, what is this crap? Especially it was Afa was ready to throw down, and that entire bit was because social media, the WWE gauged social media, and the fans, they didn't want Roman as champion. And then they did it again WrestleMania a couple years later when Brock Lesnar beat him clean again. And So I think you got to look at that character, and then another side of it, and one I'm going to bounce to you guys here in a second, is the stories of the dirt sheets. I know, Mike, you and I have talked about some of the dirt sheets in the past. That Vince McMahon, there's been stories that have come out. Some of the producers that used to work for him, Jim Ross, for example, have said that he'll tear up scripts to Raw or SmackDown 10 minutes before showtime because he catches wind that something leaked on social media. And now we got to change the script just because I don't want social media to be right. So, I mean, Jason, I'm going to go to you first, and then Mike, I'll the follow up. Vince McMahon, I mean, would you just put an entire production crew, anybody that's ever worked, had a deadline, be it for work or anything, how stressful that can be. Now you've got 10 minutes to come up with an entire new show just because Vince McMahon didn't want Dave Meltzer to leak something. So where do you draw the line, Jason, with falling on that sword? Like, at what point do you say, look, maybe not everybody's going to watch Twitter or read Twitter. Let's just let it happen, and we'll go from there. Where do you draw that line?
That's the perfect answer. I mean, I've done that in my professional life, where we've overlooked something or something's changed and it's already gone out. So you kind of have to deal with it, let it go. I tell you, I would not want to be one of those writers with that. Vince is the boss, so what he says goes. But I would have, in this day and age, I would let it go. It's going to be found out. I mean, he just recently got really upset that it got leaked that the NXT wrestlers were going to be in the stands. Unless you and I think because of that, they're going to do an internal investigation.
Right.
Unless you do something on the same style as like a Star Wars, where they have super secret, different versions of scripts and all the details like that, then something's going to get out. That's fair.
Mike, you're a man who's been based on your background there, a man who's been known to enjoy a geek thing or two. Several high-profile films. Jason mentioned Star Wars. I know Avengers. They filmed, spoiler alert, fans, but they filmed Robert Downey Jr. brought him in after the end game was over to film Tony Stark's death scene by himself. And there was a story. Several of the actors weren't told that was a funeral they were at. They were told to dress for a wedding. And then obviously, Star Wars, J.J. Abrams getting areas declared no-fly zones. And you hear stories, Vince McMahon. There was actually the recent round of firings that have come out. There were some rumors that some of the higher-profile names in that group may have been punishment for being a little loose-lipped. I mean, I know several people, like a Mike Chioda, for example, has had connections in the business for 20 years. Maybe it's time to move on so I can get some of these guys that I know aren't going to talk. So, Mike, back to you. Where do you draw the line? How do you protect the appeal, the wow factor, the surprise, whatever? With you can't rewrite. Have some. I mean, you're filming your opening segment and you haven't decided what your main event is yet.
Right. I mean, sometimes it all depends on if there's a good enough plan. If you have a backup story that you can use, like, you can't stop spoilers. There's always going to be something that leaks out. And if something happens to change, then you have a good idea to change it. You can work that in there as kind of played out as the show goes on. Mm-hmm. But you can't, like Jason said, you can't stop all spoilers. Like, sometimes things get out, and that's just how it is. Not everybody is going to be aware of it, and you'll still have some people that are surprised. So.
Right, and we're going to that's the segue to the final negative point we want to talk about is social media. Yes, we talked about how it killed kayfabe. We talked about the changes it's had. Social media has also killed the surprise and the wow factor. Several high-profile events in the last 10 years have been ruined by social media, and the first one, the biggest, actually, I personally think was the biggest one, was Brock Lesnar's return after WrestleMania. When he had signed that joint contract with the WWE and the UFC, when he came out and beat up John Cena, that the social media had been reporting that Brock Lesnar was in contract negotiations before that event. That was something where, obviously it was still a huge moment, but you had a chunk of your audience knew it was coming. And sometimes, again, like we touch on, returns, debuts, social media has killed several high-profile returns and debuts, from Chris Jericho and The Undertaker being spoiled by fans who have posted like, oh, look, I'm at the baggage claim at Chicago Airport and Chris Jericho's here and Raw's in Chicago tonight. So we know what he's doing in town, to debuts such as the two big ones that really jump to mind for me are AJ Styles at the Royal Rumble, who he was seen, unfortunately, some fans got a glimpse of him backstage, and Sting debuting at the Survivor Series, because Sting, from the way the story goes, is he was flown in separately and driven separately. Like, even some of the people in the building didn't know who the surprise guest was. But when you go through that kind of what's the word, like a subterfuge, fans are going to try even harder to figure it out. And next thing you know, hey, we're in whatever city that was in. Fans are like, Sting was on my plane flying in today. So who else could it have been? Put two and two together. So that goes to you guys. Mike, we'll start with you since Jason got the last question. How do you balance, maybe not balance, but the wow factor? Is that where the responsibility falls to the fans and not the company to just shut up and keep it to yourself?
Yeah, I would say so, because like, just because you see somebody in the airport, or you back then you saw somebody, just like, you can probably say it to like your friend or whatever that's at the show with you. Like, oh, hey, look who that is. But you don't need to post it on there to try to get retweets and likes for yourself. And that just ruins the surprise for like a bunch of other people.
That's fair. Jason, the flip side to that is the wrestlers. Sometimes the wrestlers have to stay off social media. One of the big things that's killed kayfabe, especially, and we've talked about it at length on various episodes of the program, is the damage that wrestlers take nowadays. I mean, you'll watch a match and 2-3 table spots, somebody will get powerbombed through a ladder, and that's not the finish. I remember watching wrestling in the 80s, and the ref gets distracted, Mr. Wonderful hits somebody with a padded chair, and that's the end of it. Now it's like you get powerbombed through two burning tables and you kick out at 2. Especially in the empty arena era, where they can start doing these cinematic matches where it's obvious there's cuts, or where they can edit to the crash pads out and stuff like that.
Right.
Moments where wrestlers will take a bump on a program that should kill them.
Right.
You get thrown off a building, you get pushed through a burning whatever, an ambulance explodes, something like that. And an hour later, they're on social media liking a post from the NFL or talking. So I'm backstage watching the football game. Go Saints! Wait a minute, you're dead. Like
when Paul Bearer got buried in cement at the Great American Bash.
Yeah. I think one of the recent ones, in the build up to WrestleMania, Elias, Baron Corbin knocked Elias off that camera platform, something like 30 feet. The camera pans down. It's obvious cuts. But he's laying on concrete. It's like, okay, you're dead.
Yeah.
And then an hour later, he's on some Skype call, Sasha Banks or whatever. It's like some group Skype chat. It's like, you're dead. Like, okay, maybe not. So Jason, same question, but for the fans, does it become the duty of the wrestlers then? You talked about having a public and a private persona. Does it become the duty of the wrestler to say, look, I just got put through a flaming table. I just got Braun Strowman threw me off the Hell in a Cell, whatever. Like, maybe I need to stay off social media for a couple days to sell this, kind of keep the kayfabe.
I think it should. I think they definitely should. If they are truly in love with the character, or they are just for the business, they're going to do whatever they can to protect that character. And if that means you have to stay off Facebook or something for a few days because you're rehabbing an injury, or you got blown up in a limo or something, do it. It not only is for the betterment of the sport and the fans, but it also prolongs your career. And I think a lot of them forget that. A lot of, with anybody, a lot of posts are in the heat of the moment. So, yeah. You said Elias watched the game or something. It doesn't take but a second to grab your phone. It's almost like instinct these days. Oh, I saw a great touchdown. It's like, oh man, I'm supposed to be sprawled out in the hospital.
Like Mike was saying, I'm buried in concrete right now. Yeah. What am I doing on? It's funny. That's actually a good transition, because we look at the negative. That narrative can also shift to the positive in the wrestler. You talk about like the sports and some of the comments, is that social media, and we're going to look at now the positive side, is social media has given wrestlers a platform to become more, for lack of a better term, human and relatable than they ever could have. I mean, some of the greater wrestlers of our day weren't very good talkers. That's why managers were so prominent back in the 70s and 80s with your Slick and your Jim Cornettes and your, Bobby Heenans and Paulie Dangerous, all those guys, the Wizard, and because you had so many wrestlers that needed mouthpieces, either for their character, such as like a Kamala, or someone like I hate to say it, but somebody like a Mr. Wonderful, who was phenomenal, physique, in-ring talent. But as far as you put him in the ring next to Roddy Piper and Bobby Heenan, and you realize he's the worst talker standing there. So let Bobby Heenan be his mouth, but if you give these wrestlers a platform, someone who might not be able to connect in the ring can connect on social media. And you see that with the promo skills, and you especially see that, Mike, you mentioned Zack Ryder. You see with the guys who can't get TV time, and we'll get to getting themselves over. But the other thing too, Jason, you mentioned the fine line Becky Lynch was walking. Social media also gives wrestlers a platform where, and I hate to say this because I am an avid kayfabe lover, where breaking character is actually the right thing to do. And this recent events that have occurred in America right now with the riots and with various other things, wrestlers have come out and said, look, I don't agree with this statement, or we need to, Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn. I mean, these guys, that's not Kevin Owens the performer. That's Kevin Steen, the man.
Yeah.
You have these guys. That's the person. It allows them to break character. So, Michael, I'll start with you. How good? Where do you put that as far as a positive? Where social media gives wrestlers a platform to be themselves when they need to be. Someone like a John Cena granting a wish, for example. He's not the character. That's John Cena, the man, showing he's a good person. Where do you draw that line? Where, if you understand what I'm asking, where you draw the line between where it's good to break character and where you got to maintain the status quo?
I mean, one that comes to mind, that another wrestler that uses social media very well for himself, Xavier Woods. He's managed to capitalize on it. Like, I first started following him on social media before he got famous, because of his posts, because of the thing that he's into. He's a geek as well, and he plays video games. So I started following him on that, and then sure enough, then he starts blowing up with the New Day and everything. Right. But then even still, he still managed to keep on that popularity on social media and build it on his own thing. And even he can still collect paychecks when he's injured, because he still has the shows. He can still be doing things like that.
It's a good point. Jason, looked like you had something to add.
Well, I kind of want to challenge you on the John Cena thing. Is it John Cena the person or John Cena the character? It can go both ways.
Well, that's true. John Cena, the character, is who the kids want to see.
Right.
But when just recently, even when mask and gloves and everything, John Cena is something like 600 and change wishes now. And they said there's only a couple people that are over 200, and he's at 600. I mean, he's granted more wishes than the next 4 people combined.
Wow.
And I mean, there comes a point when, you know, the Eddie Graham, great promoter, and he used to say, and a lot of other people have too, but he used to talk about the best characters in wrestling are yourself turned up to 11.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, obviously the line of where John Cena, the hustle, loyalty, respect, you know, and John Cena, I'm going to spend 20 hours a day talking to fans, because I mean, when you keep that physique and that acting schedule and you're still granting a couple wishes a month, I mean, I don't even know when the man sleeps, but I think you're right, Jason. I'll concede that point that, yeah, you blur the line between John Cena, the man. That's something social media has been good with, is, you know, these kids post pictures of John Cena at the hospital. And it's like, man, you know, that's part of the reason John Cena could never turn heel, was his presence with the company on social media is so positive that you couldn't do it. The company physically couldn't do it, because you'd lose that narrative. You know, to go, what's that?
He's this generation's Hogan.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
He's going out there to say, you know, not necessarily say your prayers and eat your vitamins, but he's definitely got that stick, and the kids love him. So if he can use that, his character, to do, you know, make these wishes, do good in society, go for it.
That's a good point. No, and that's actually a good transition to the next point on the same topic of personality on social media. Is Mike, you mentioned Xavier Woods. That's actually a great bit, because Xavier Woods kind of really led the charge of people who developed their character on social media. Social media gives a platform for character development, plot development, storyline development that you can't have on television. And maybe in such a way, Xavier Woods comes out, you know, the trombone and the big hair and some of the facets of the New Day people don't realize first started as jokes on social media. His up down down page, you know, and then the positive, the final positive I want to touch on under this category is social media gives wrestlers a direct lifeline, and several high profile. Yeah, okay, Mike. Mike, back to you with the point. I was talking about the connections that weak fans can have, the direct connections fans can have with wrestlers. And I think the ones that I'm going to touch on is Jake the Snake Roberts and Kamala, along with many others like Rico Constantino and Greg Valentine, have crowdsourced medical expenses to fans. And Jake the Snake Roberts has said many times, it was actually touched on in in the Resurrecting the Snake documentary, that when his surgery was funded completely, there's something like 24 hours or 48 hours, he realized he had given up, and he realized, like, 10 years later, 15 years later, fans still love me. They remember me. He credits that with helping turn him around, the seeing the connection he has with the fans. So I'm going to go to you on that one. The direct lifeline, for lack of a better term, that wrestlers have with fans. What kind of positive do you see from that?
I see a real positive, especially, from, you know, legends, you know, people that, you know, that we grew up on watching as kids, that have fallen on hard times, even people up and coming guys, indie guys that you might not pick out of a bunch, but, you know, if you see them on social media, you might become interacting with them. Case in point, he's now, it goes by Donovan Dijak, I think. He's on NXT.
Dominic Dijakovic?
Yeah, Dijakovic, yeah. He followed me on Twitter a while ago when he was just in ROH, and I was like, okay, now I'm starting paying attention to this guy. I started watching ROH, follow this guy's matches, and that's a definite lifeline. Get yourself out there for people who wouldn't normally have any idea who you are.
You know, and that's a great transition. The next point I want to touch on, the positives that social media has, is wrestlers getting themselves over. And part of that, Mike, that's a perfect setup, is indie promotions, indie performers, because of YouTube and Twitter and Facebook. You know, you figure, you guys go to an indie promotion. Jason, you and I have gone to the local show here in VCW. You know, that's not a national broadcast. But now these guys that are performing in a gymnasium in front of 50 people, there's somebody in Japan, in California, 10, 30, 1,000 miles away is watching their match because of because a moment on Twitter, and it gives these guys exposure. AEW, a bulk of their roster is the indie darlings, your Kenny Omegas and your Young Bucks, and these are guys that would not be, for better or worse, depending on your opinion of that style of wrestling, they would not be successful. The Young Bucks wouldn't have a career if they wrestled in the social media era. Same thing with your Orange Cassidys, with your I'm gonna skip over him, but there's other wrestlers who have quirks, maybe, for lack of a better term, who would not have succeeded outside of social media because you hit that niche market, and next thing you know. So it's funny how they can get themselves over like that. And then the indie performers, and you touched on in the very beginning, Zack Ryder. You mentioned Zack Ryder. He hit the second half of his career with his internet championship. Also, towards the end of his run, if you remember Ted DiBiase Jr., the DiBiase posse, he would set straight, organize like a barbecue, and he'd be outside the arena with hot dogs, hanging out with the fans, because he knew the creative doesn't have anything for me today. I'm going to click with the fans. You know,
right?
So it gives guys times to get over. So Mike brought a really good point. Jason, I'm going to go to you. How do you see that as these indie fans, these smaller wrestlers, these guys who maybe can't get screen time, turning into a mainstream, someone like a Zack Ryder going from an anonymous jobber to fans chanting your name, demanding you be on TV? Where's the positive? I mean, obviously the positive, but where do you see the positive there?
It's a free advertising stream. If you want to get recognized, AEW's was it Darby Allin? I'm not sure if I'm saying his last name.
Darby
Perfect
Allin.
example.
That's it.
He is using it to his advantage, and he's gotten pretty far. I like where he's going with his character, and he's been recognized by other. Jericho's had some good things to say about him, but no, it's somebody that is on the indies that don't have a lot of opportunities. They can go out and use social for free. I mean, it's a way to get their name out there and get noticed, like Darby Allin.
Darby Allin's a good one. One of my favorites, because I followed a lot of the indie, was Tim Storm. He was the NWA champion. They did a series of YouTube videos that kind of followed him as they were rebuilding the NWA following its purchase. Mm-hmm. And he was in his 50s. He was the older traveling champion, and that led to what became NWA Power. So I mean, you have an entire company that phoenixed itself back from the ashes, that it wouldn't exist without social media. NWA, as it is now, doesn't exist. If not, I mean, obviously they're a YouTube exclusive show, but they don't exist without social media. Darby Allin is a good one. Several people who have seen pushes, like your Jungle Boys and your Luchasauruses, who built themselves up on the indies and on social media. MJF, I mentioned him, who's, I think, the best heel in the business right now.
Yeah.
And his entire persona exists from a character that was built on social media and came up, and the promos. So continuing there, you see organizations too, Mike, like New Japan and AAA, that gained a social media following and rolled that social media presence into a television deal in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you see the importance of social media on expanding the current product?
Oh, I definitely think that it can definitely help anybody promote their stuff. I mean, like you brought up New Japan and AAA with the Bullet Club on the internet, like that. Those T-shirts just like took off, and then people wanted to see those matches, and people were like, "Well, how can I see that?" So then they worked out deals, and even indies can work out things like that too. Like I know VCW has like they call it a streaming network. I don't know how much that is, but they can put their stuff out there on social media.
$4.99 a month.
Nice, good deal.
Plug to some of my friends here in Virginia. But yeah, I think it shows the importance there. I mentioned New Japan. We talked earlier about the direct interaction that fans can have. We touched on obviously the negative, your Roman Reigns, your pushes. But fans, their direct impact can also have a positive. I mean, let's be honest. One of the best moments of the last 10 years, WrestleMania 30, Daniel Bryan winning the title in New Orleans. That doesn't happen without social media, period. Because Daniel Bryan is another minor guy who somebody decides Triple H, Vince McMahon, they decide he's not good enough. If you remember the narrative, Batista was going to win the Rumble, and then Batista was going to beat Orton in New Orleans and be the conquering hero, and that didn't happen because the fans got behind a different storyline. I think in recent memory, there's actually talk that there's contracts coming to several of the recently released talents. But the one that really jumps out to the fans is Drake Maverick. When Drake Maverick was cut, he made a very tearful video. He talked about, he appreciated the opportunity, but his lifeline was over. And he was still signed on to do the Cruiserweight tournament. The Cruiserweight Championship tournament. So he's like, if I don't impress the right people in his matches, my career's over. And that was Drake Maverick, the character, and Drake Maverick, the person, begging for his job. And now it looks like he's going to end up getting one. The fans got behind him. And I don't think because no spoilers, but he got far in the tournament, to the finals, which is coming up, that, he doesn't get that push without the fan support from social media. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm not sure if you saw today, but there is a rumor that a lot of the release wrestlers from WWE, there might be going to Impact.
Yeah, I did.
Impact did a commercial or something, a teaser.
Yes, Impact released an image that was like a collage, and it in the collage was things like a Bulgarian flag. There was a set of hands that, and it was, I want to say there was a reference to Zack Ryder in there. There were several names where people were like, this is either a good troll or you're about to have a big debut.
What's Keith Slater doing in the Impact Zone?
Keith Slater, man, he's got to work. He's got kids, remember? But no, I think it's funny because that's actually a good one, Jason. You talk with the Impact. People are talking about Impact, where social media has allowed storylines. I touched on it earlier. Storylines to start and stop, feuds to start and stop. Shows like maybe a TNA, for example, who don't have the 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours of programming a week that the WWE has. You have to build an angle. Social media is the only way you're getting that press. Right. If you only have an hour or two a week to build up a show, and you need to push 10 people at the same time, you're going to use Twitter and YouTube. AEW has a YouTube exclusive show that ties into the main storyline to the point where I've tried to watch AEW and missed something, and I'm pulling my phone out in the middle of the show, like, oh, the angle Jim Ross was talking about happened on YouTube last week. No wonder I didn't see it. Or YouTube's, they've been doing their pay-per-view kickoff shows, the buy-in shows they call them, have aired on YouTube to hype up the upcoming pay-per-view. Their matches are usually a hype up to the pay-per-view. And then obviously, and I know we've joked about it before. Just this week, Rob Gronkowski announced he activated his release clause because he's leaving wrestling to go back to the NFL. They talked into playing for the Buccaneers with the trade. So needless to say, he lost his title. So R-Truth, record-shattering 36th time champion. So I mean, but you realize something like the 24/7 title, which I'll be honest, for a good stretch was some of the most entertaining stuff that WWE was doing. I remember being at a SmackDown here where R-Truth pretended to be a lamp. So he's like standing on the ramp with a lampshade on his head. And it's one of those moments of silliness where it's obviously a person with a lampshade, but no one's acknowledging that he's standing there, and then he pulls the lampshade off, and it's like, oh, where did you come from? But
that reminds me so much of the old hardcore matches.
Yeah.
And I have to say, I'm such a belt mark that is got to be the ugliest belt in professional wrestling.
I will say, being off topic for a moment, I thought so too. I completely agreed. The 24/7 title was the ugliest belt I've ever seen until I saw the TNT Television Championship.
Ooh,
that
yeah.
thing
not
is
done.
now. Yes, I was about to say, Tony Khan has said it's not finished. The center plate is blank. They apparently couldn't get the jeweler to do all the engraving and the stones and everything. So hopefully, when it's finished, it'll look better. But right now, that thing is awful. Ooh. It reminded me of the there was an old show years ago called WMAC Masters. It was like a karate wrestling show. It was fake fighting.
That,
But they had a belt that had like a star in it, and it looked really tacky because obviously their budget was low. That's when I saw the TNT belt, I was like, that's the kind of belt you'd see on one of those old wrestling programs where the guy, the champion makes $50 a week and some McDonald's coupons.
Yeah.
If you do a topic on belts, be sure to call me back.
Oh, absolutely. We've got, and there are some good ones. But it's funny. Social media, it's done so much. So as we wrap up, guys, I appreciate you coming out. We'll go, Mike, your closing thoughts on social media and wrestling.
I think it's really the way of the future. I think it definitely has helped the business in so many ways. It's hurt the business in some ways, but for the most part, it's helped those guys that didn't have a method of getting on, those companies that didn't have a method of getting eyes on their product. And it's, as long as people can keep mindful of what they're putting out there, it's a fantastic way for the business to progress into the 21st century as we roll on through that.
Good closing. Jason, what are your final thoughts on social media and wrestling?
I totally agree with Mike. Like I said earlier, it's an extension of the star's presence, whether it's in real life in the stadium. You just got to be mindful. Bottom line is it's your career, it's your living. So you got to watch what you say or watch the topics. Back to the was it Jackson? Not only it was the fans, but his stepsister, called him out.
Yeah.
So that's not only your professional, now you got your personal and family issues. So, I think promotions need to get more involved, not really restrict it, but, kind of have some ground rules. Where it doesn't go too over the top, but it could be used to really promote themselves and promote the company.
It's a fair point.
Well, there you have note.
Go ahead, Mike.
I just want to say one note on that Jackson Riker thing. His posting was the first time that I was aware of that he was a real person, because I just thought he was one of like the Baron Blade, a created guy that's in the 2K game. I was like, oh, wow, that's a guy. Oh, wow.
That's funny. I didn't think about that because there's a couple of, for lack of a better term, low profile wrestlers that made it into the 2K game that I'm sure people are looking at going, is this guy real? But yeah, that's funny. Well, actually, it's funny you mentioned that because that's an upcoming topic on the show. We're going to be looking at wrestling and video games, future shows. Jason, you suggested belts. That's a good one. With the next 2 episodes of the Roundtable are going to be, we talked about wrestling and video games, and also you guys I touched on with you already, is we're going to look at a roundtable discussion on potential future topics for Dark Side of the Ring. Now that it's been announced that show's been picked up for a 3rd season. They actually confirmed the season finale, the Owen Hart episode, was the #1 rated show in the history of Vice Network. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, they picked it up for a 3rd season. I'm sure it'll get a 4th. So we'll look at that. We got a lot coming up. Again, I appreciate you guys being here.
You're
For
welcome.
those listening, obviously Wrestling with the Future, we can be found on Facebook and YouTube, Wrestling with the Future podcast. We're on Twitter at Wrestling Future. That's no G, Wrestling Future. Dan the Man, I'm on Twitter at @theman_WWTF. So this has been the Refs Roundtable. We said a lot today. For Mike, for Jason, for myself, Dan the Man, and I will see you next time I have something to say.